Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my distinct honor to introduce Dr. Kenan Sahin, who does not need introduction for this audience. As you know, he is a founding member of TASSA. He set the stage for the vision of TASSA, and he also helped us over the ensuing years to make sure the vision has been accomplished, and we are here because of his vision. So we are thankful to him that he's here with us once again. And Dr., I would like to give you, his accomplishments and accolades are very long, but I would like to give you a little bit of it. I know he doesn't want it. He was born in Aydın, Turkey, attended Robert Lise, and after that he came to MIT, and he got his bachelor's and PhD. He graduated in 1982. That's when I actually went to MIT as a graduate student. And the buzz was around at MIT that there's this software company called Kenan Systems that was started at the time, a pioneering company. I remember walking on Main Street and Memorial Drive, and the building was in the corner looking at Charles River, with an American colleague of mine, and I said, "Oh, Kenan Systems must be a Turkish guy." And he said, "Yes, Kenan, you should read about him. He's quite accomplished, and this is the future of software technologies." That company has become World Economic Forum's in 2007, I believe, one of the global growth companies. Some of those years, I can't remember the exact, but 1999, I know it was acquired by Lucent, and that was the largest acquisition of a software company at the time. And of course, Dr. Sahin wouldn't stay put, and he started thinking about the next vision for himself, and that started to turn out to be, this time, not a software company, but an actual hardware company called TAIAX. TAIAX was actually the former Arthur D. Little, minus the consulting portion of the Arthur D. Little. This was an advanced manufacturing company. He took that and a wonderful new vision where he said, let's take nascent early stage ideas, put advanced manufacturing behind it, mature it, de-risk it, and turn into new companies that gave birth to many companies, one of which is called Chemex. He's the chairman of it. And he's one of the leading battery companies that will solve some of the problems we just heard about Tesla engines. And hopefully they'll go back and forth to Canada from DC without needing for charging. And but Dr. Sahin, I'm going to keep embarrassing him a little bit more since I have the stage. He's not just a brilliant entrepreneur and a technologist, but he's also a humanitarian. He has a lot of social activities as well as charitable activities. He serves on the MIT Lifetime Corporation, and that's a major accomplishment in education. He serves on the board of Robert College, and he is also a member of the President's Council of Competitiveness. And I also believe he's very much into arts, and he's on the board of Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. So he has a long list of a lot of accomplishments, but the one that's really dear to all of us is his heart and mind is always with TASSA. Whenever we call him for any question, advice, or for him to share his views with us, he shows up. And today is no exception. I believe he was in overseas. He just flew in from overseas. And tomorrow he's heading back to Boston. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Sahin. Thank you.
I don't think I recognize the person who's described. It must be someone else. But it really is a great pleasure to be here. And I'm really sorry I missed the presentations, but indeed I was, in fact, in Germany and pursuing matters that relate, it just so happens, batteries and other things. And it's also a great pleasure for me to be here for TASSA, to be sure, but TASSA at University of Chicago. which is a special institution for many reasons. When I was trying to pursue my doctorate, University of Chicago gave me an exceptional offer. And I refused it for probably stupid reasons. But when I mentioned it to Professor Schultz, who was the dean here, he couldn't believe it. He said, how could you do something like this? But it was the attraction of MIT, which in due time, in a roundabout way, brought me in contact with Dr. Eric Isaacs at Bell Labs. And Dr. Littlewood was also at Bell Labs. And I joined the mafia that actually rules science in the United States. It's the Bell Labs mafia. Wherever you go, typically there is somebody from the Bell Labs, and it just so happens a lot of them were trained at MIT. So that is the true mafia, but the next stage mafia is Bell Labs. Anyway, I just had the great pleasure of actually being a vice president at Bell Labs. That was for me the height of my professional dreams fulfilled. And I remember sitting at the Bell Labs Council. I don't know why they chose me, but it was always fun. And indeed, Bell Labs has kind of disappeared, but it has not. I think its members are everywhere. And again, Dr. Littlewood is here, and I understand Dr. Isaacs was here in the morning. But I came here not to talk about those. I'm the entertainment. I'm sure you heard some very serious presentations. Science is serious business. And it gets into the deep thoughts of the human mind. The mystery being, how is it that this tiny brain that compared to the universe can envision and study black holes and so on. It goes on and on and on. And I started thinking about not black holes, but infinity when I was age 15, went through Georg Cantor, his theories, and so on. Here I am at this age, still mystified, and so on. And I think it is something that I will not understand as I close my eyes. But let me start, since I said entertainment, with one of my favorite sources of infinite wisdom, and that's Nasreddin Hoca. Now, Dr. Littlewood might not know who Nasreddin Hoca is. He's the equivalent of Aesop. Aesop was serious. Nasreddin Hoca discovered that humor is much better a tool to get points across. So this, I have many, of course, stories that have inspired me. This one is, I'm sure most people here know it, but I will repeat it for the benefit of those who don't. The man is sitting on a branch and cutting the branch, but he's cutting it from the wrong end. And Hoca is passing by. He says, you know, you're going to fall. The man says, I know what I am doing. 5 minutes later, of course he falls. He's running after Hoca, and the story is not that he fell. He says, how did you know? And you look at so many situations. You say, you know, if you keep doing what you're doing, this is what's going to happen. And the person says, no, I know what I'm doing. And then he comes to you and says, gee, how could you have known? How could you have known? And there are many phenomena that are going on today that fall into that category. Now, I'll give you a very ridiculous example. It just so happened I was reading a magazine about Maine, and the remnant of a community called the Shaker community. Now, the Shaker community was a branch of Quakers with one important difference. They did not believe in sex. They wanted to be celibate. Great. But there aren't Shakers around to tell their story. They have left behind furniture, beautiful furniture, Shaker furniture. If you can find it, buy it. So it is beautiful. But there are no Shakers to explain it. And someone could have told them, you know, if you remain celibate, you will just die off. But they probably said, you don't understand our divine thoughts. The reason I mention these things is one can look at dogma, one can look at deep thoughts, either with awe and feelings and emotions, or in a very mechanical way, very straightforward way. So with that in mind, and since I'm the entertainment, and since I think the universe, black holes, infinity, I'm sure have been covered, I want to go back in time. And I brought a book because my academic credentials have expired. You know, in the US, when you leave academia, you're done. But in Germany, you're always a Herr Professor. But here, I'm an ex-professor. And that was, by the way, a big issue for me at Lucent. I was eventually one of the top 15 executives at Lucent. And I would try to warn them, raise my hand. And I would be accused of being an ex-professor who really wouldn't understand business. And I should have told them the Hoja story. You're cutting the branch from the wrong end, and you're going to fall. They probably would have said, we know what we're doing. And Lucent is gone. And Bell Labs is gone. And it's really sad. But that's how it happens. Shakers are gone too. And in fact, one of the stories I did tell at Lucent was the following. I said, did you hear of a man who fell 5,000 feet? Nothing happened to him. I said, really? He fell another foot and was dead. And many people don't understand. You could be falling 5,000 feet. Nothing happens to you. One more foot and you're dead. So why do I say all of these things at 5 o'clock at the end of the day? Now, this microphone disappeared. Okay, it's back. I wanted to, since my academic credentials are gone, read from a book which has excellent academic credentials. It's Josiah Ober, The Rise and Fall of Classical Greece. Now, I was born in Aydın, stone's throw from Ephesus, and all these wonderful ancient cities. And those of you who might not be from Turkey, you know Homer was born in Smyrna, Izmir. And the historian Herodotus was born in Halikarnassos, which is now Bodrum. And I can go on and on and on. Now, this book, the preface says the following. This is himself talking, not me. I live in exceptional times. I can take for granted a global order defined by many independent states, some of them wealthy democratic federations governed ultimately by their citizens. Freedom, equality, and dignity are widely shared values. In states where citizens keep rules in check, not rules. I want to repeat that. In states where citizens keep rules in check, public authority protects individual rights, and the rule of law persists most of the time. These political conditions promote economic growth. And then he goes on to say that, but many people who do not yet enjoy those conditions aspire to them. Democracy and growth. Define the normal, although not yet the usual. Conditions of modernity. Autocracy, while still prevalent, is regarded as apparent. I want to repeat that. Autocracy, while still prevalent, is regarded as apparent, so that most autocrats pretend to be democrats. Isn't that ironic? Economic stagnation is seen as a problem that demands a solution. Now, this is how he describes the present state. And then he goes on to say, these conditions were not normal or even imaginable for most people through most of human history. But for several centuries, in the first millennium BCE, democracy and growth were normal for citizens in ancient Greece. Just a few centuries, and it disappeared. It died. It was a great innovation, one of the greatest inventions of the human mind. And it happened in my neck of the woods. I'm very proud of that. And then it disappeared. It died, only to be rediscovered. One of the greatest rediscoveries, I believe, of humankind, and he mentions that for the past several thousand years of human history, and until the 18th century, 2,000 years, it disappeared. Most people lived under the rule of an autocrat, be they kings, whatever, who claimed a special relationship to divinity. Certainly ancient Egyptians lived that way. And in the medieval ages, so-called dark ages, that came back with full force. Pope was the representative of God on earth. And on and on. I won't give many examples. You can, I'm sure, conjure up many examples. The most successful of these rulers were masters of extensive empires. But most of their subjects lived perilously close to bare subsistence. Yes, the empires prospered, but not the subjects. And that's the difference between autocracy and democracy. The subjects, they participating in economic growth. And in so many ways, that is the fundamental part, essence of democracy. Sharing the wealth with the people and having economic growth as an engine to keep that wealth growing so that it can be shared, so that people can prosper. And that's what happened in ancient Greece. They really prospered. They became, the middle classes became wealthy. They were able to think, cogitate, and they questioned everything. In fact, the notion was, life that is not questioned is not worth living. And that's what science is. There is nothing that science cannot and should not question. Everything is up there for questioning. That's what TASSA is about. We heard it today. It was very eloquently mentioned. It's curiosity. It's the human mind looking into everything, bizarre as it may be, and trying to understand it. Now, the opposite of this, I'm done with this book. Now I bring out my little cheat sheet. The opposite of this is domination. And my conjecture is the following. Democracy, as invented by the ancient Greeks, is technology. And I can, in some ways, identify the components of that technology. Now, I'll give other examples. University is a technology. There's a way of doing a university. And once that technology is understood, you can create universities. And in Turkey, I'm very proud that there are, close to now 200 private universities. Business is a technology. And I grew up at MIT at an era, I didn't understand what was going on. Apparently, the technology of a business school was being created right around me. And once that technology was created, it became exportable, understandable, as opposed to Harvard's mysterious way of a business school, where you bring smart people, smart professors, they talk to each other in a mysterious way and intuitively develop what it takes to run a business. MIT wasn't like that. Stanford wasn't like that. The question was asked, what is the technology of business? Finance, accounting, law, sociology, you name it. And the curriculum was founded, textbooks were written. Look at it now. We went from 2,000, 3,000 privileged students being educated in the sacred halls of Harvard and such schools to what? I don't know. All over the world now. In fact, I asked a Chinese professor, I said, how many universities do you have? And he said about 1,000. I said, what's the most popular subject? I really thought it would be math or science. He said, business. It's the most popular subject. They can teach it with the same textbooks that we teach. That has technology. And the government also has a technology. So I cogitated over it. Now, I'm not a political scientist. I'm a little bit out of my elements. But we make such light-hearted comments. So I said, what is the technology of democracy? What is it? What is it? Well, to me, anyway, so this is a very personal perspective. It's really people getting together without really very strong leaders telling them what to do to resolve conflict and resource contention. Life is full of conflict. When an animal goes out, it's facing conflict. When I start my day, I know I'm going to face many conflicts. And there's some displeasure with conflict, negativity. But that's life. Contention. There are other positive words. Competition. They all mean the same thing. Conflict. You have something, I want it. I have something, you want it. How are we going to resolve it? I can kill you and grab what you have, or you can kill me. That's done too. That's not, but that's not democracy. That's brutality. So how do we do it? We create forums, and the Greeks really formulated many different ways of resolving conflict. So I say democracy, first of all, starts with being unhappy. You're not there, oh, I'm so happy, everything in my life is in order, I'm just going to sit here and die. You go, I don't have what I want. I want to get it, and I run into you. So we have to resolve the conflict. So it has to start with dissatisfaction. A democratic society is inherently dissatisfied. Everybody is complaining. That's fine. That's healthy. Nothing wrong with that. But then you don't kill each other. You need forums to resolve conflict. And the Greeks established those. You can read the details. So conflict resolution is a very important part of democracy. If you can't resolve conflict, you go to your father, and your father admonishes you, and so on. So you have to find a way of doing it. So you create forums, all kinds of forums, courts, parliaments, whatever, town meetings, and then you need institutions to protect those forums, because those forums come under tremendous pressure. They can be easily corrupted. That's what the Greeks discovered. And they would constantly change the forums so that the people would not get corrupted. Because it's very easy to corrupt. But they kept rotating. They kept rotating. And that happens in a democracy. It's called an election. You make sure people rotate. They don't stay too long. If they stay too long, they get corrupted and they corrupt others. See, Greeks figured these out. So if we can rotate, those are the institutions that protect the institutions of conflict resolution, then you come to innovation. Because you have people coming together in this conflict competition. They are creating many, many ideas. And the Greeks did that in their city-states. And are these things happening in Turkey? Now, I want to make the following qualification. My comments are not directed to Turkey. They apply just as well to what's happening in the United States today. I will make exactly the same comments about what's happening. So let me move on. I would say that now that I will speak a little bit technical, and I'm watching my time, you said 40 minutes, right? Let me now introduce a concept that you're all familiar with, feedback. Information theory feedback. I had the great pleasure of knowing Claude Shannon, by the way. What a genius. What a genius. And also Norbert Wiener, cybernetics and so on and so forth. I remember him walking around the campus, and the man was a little bit forgetful. I remember at the cafeteria one day, he couldn't find what his money was. He had to go through every pocket and so on and so forth. Anyway, the key aspect of, at least to me, of cybernetics is the following. I mean, not cybernetics, feedback theory. If you want something to be really excellent, there are multiple ways of doing it. One is every component is absolutely excellent. It's serial. There's no feedback. And if one component is not, the outcome will not be excellent. But if you have feedback, there's an opportunity to adjust. Every engineer knows that if you have feedback, you can have elements that are not necessarily high quality. But through feedback, you still can get excellent results. Now that's a profound thought, and that's what democracy is. And that's why freedom of thought, press, all of these things come into the picture. That is the feedback mechanism. That's why a bunch of ignorant people can get together and come up with rather profound ideas. Because constantly there's that feedback going on. Sometimes incremental, sometimes not so incremental. So if you take the feedback away, you have to have exceptionally precise planning. NASA planning. Even NASA uses feedback, right? It's sending a rocket to the moon. You have to use feedback. You have to find out where that thing is so that you can make corrections. If you don't make corrections, you're lost in space. And that's what happens in democracy too, as opposed to precise planning. Precise planning was tried, is still tried, but without feedback, you go off course. So let me come back. Democracy is an environment of dissatisfaction, conflict, noise, and all of these things. And it's good, it's healthy. And it leads to economic growth. If you don't have economic growth, then democracy cannot really be sustained. And that gets me to another point. Wealth that is created needs to be shared. And best way of sharing that wealth is providing people good work. Good work. You can hand the wealth to people, but that's not necessarily a good mechanism. And then I will get into a few more points. One is feedback and applying it mechanically. One doesn't need ideology, one doesn't need dogma. It's just a straightforward notion. That applies to mechanical things, that applies to inanimate objects. It also applies to people. Feedback, openness, communication, they all strengthen the process and lead to innovation and lead to economic growth, wealth generation. Take it away, and eventually the system begins to lose its growth, and it becomes static. Now, what's the danger in that? That brings me to my next point. The rule of 72. Very mechanical, like the shakers, or the guy cutting the branch the wrong way. You look at him, you say, you're going to fall. He doesn't believe you, but it happens anyway. And probably the shakers didn't believe that they would die off. But they did. If you don't have babies, you die off. Very simple. You don't need deep science to know that. Even kids will know that. Even they know that babies don't come with a stalk. There's a mechanism for doing it. So what is this rule of 72? And why is it so applicable to what is going on in the world? Now, I'll come back to this book. If the whole world were static, it wouldn't matter. But the world now has discovered democracy and economic growth. Let me take the United States. These are observations, by the way. They apply to every country. Please do not take them as being particular to Turkey. I'm making general comments. Same discussions are happening here in the United States. U.S. population is 5% of the global population. Yeah, we're at about 7 billion, we're about 325 in the U.S., 5%. U.S. generates 25% of global wealth. GDP in the United States is $17 trillion. 17 trillion. The world is at about 60, 62, 63 trillion. 25% here, with 5% of the population. It's an enormous amount of innovation. Enormous. Why is this important to note? Well, let me take, and the U.S. is growing real at about 2.5 to 3%. My own estimate is U.S. is actually growing in excess of 5%. Why do I say that? Because the economists don't capture growth, I think, in a realistic way. A lot of the U.S. growth is in China. I, in fact, asked the following question. I say, if China stopped manufacturing in the United States, people wouldn't even notice. If U.S. stopped manufacturing it in China, China would collapse. A lot of Chinese production is actually American production. And if you add the two, U.S. is growing, in my opinion, well in excess of 5%. Now, why is that so important? Now, there are a lot of economists here. Take a look at the so-called marginal cost curve. You know, in my time, before IT and all of those things, marginal cost curve was well-behaved U-shaped curve. That meant, you know, the more you produced, the less it cost you, and then it bottomed out, and then it started increasing. So there was a size to a firm, size to a factory. But thanks to technology, marginal cost curves are declining and declining and declining, which means natural monopolies. Because if you can advance on your marginal cost curve, you can buy out the smaller companies. That's what's happened to Microsoft. That's what happened to Google. That's what's happened to Facebook. You name it. They're sucking up, sucking up, sucking up, because their marginal costs are still declining. So now let's think about that. That's happening to nations too. Right? The marginal cost curve of nations is declining. The marginal cost curve in the United States is declining. So U.S. is getting more and more efficient. Now let me apply this to the global picture. And I will bring in the rule of 72. If you take 72, divide it by the growth rate, that will give you the doubling time. Very simple rule. So 72, if an economy is growing, or your savings are growing, 2% a year, divide 72 by 2, that means in 36 years, the economy will double. But if I am able to grow at 5%, and you might say, what's the big deal? 2%, 5%. If I'm growing at 5% in 14 years, I will double my economy. 14. Right? So, another 14 years, 28 years, my economy will be 4 times. In 36 years, you will make it to twice. By the time you make it to twice, I'll be 5 times. Which means I'll be just suck the rest of the world. Dangerous times. Dangerous times. So economic growth is imperative for national autonomy. It's no joke. It's very serious. If it's impeded, the nation will start declining. It's like the guy cutting the branch the wrong way. And you have to allow participation. Now, I will make a controversial statement here. I don't mind, because I love human society, I love Turkey, I love the United States, I love open societies. We know what happens. Look at North Korea. Anyway, I will talk about participation. Now, in the United States, I'm a student of these kinds of phenomena. In the United States, there is tremendous amount of participation in work, in industry, in generating wealth. Who are the participants? Men, to be sure, although men are declining, believe it or not. Women. Handicapped. Old. U.S. is taking all kinds of measures to make sure every brain, every intelligent head participates in the economy. If I'm handicapped, I can't walk. The government says, accommodate that person. That person has a brain, can contribute. Half the population is women. In fact, in the United States, 60% of the university students are women. They're taking over. I predicted this as an academic. On two grounds. I said, A, I will say it, women seem to be much better in multiprocessing and much better in observing things. It's amazing. So I predicted that academically they would really succeed more. In fact, I was a graduation speaker at Koç University. I was next to Rahmi Koç. He said, where are the guys? All the best students seem to be women. In the United States too. They are really taking over. And look what has happened. That's right. That's right. That's right. I mean, look at the U.S. corporations. IBM quietly. It's a woman. And so on. I mean, it's happening. And it will happen more. It will happen more. 60% are college graduates. I mean, of the college graduates are women. 25% now of presidents are women of universities. And it's just going to increase. Women should fully participate without any inhibition. Any society that prevents women is basically depriving half the population from contributing to their economic growth. And also us older people. Once I was at a table, there was a woman, she must have been, I don't know, in her 80s and so on. She said, you know, I'm an old woman. I said, no, ma'am, you're just older. She said, may I hug you? We're all older. We're old when we think we're old. We're older. I've been to many entrepreneurial forums, and I look around, and I say, this forum is supposed to be about youth, entrepreneurship. Well, I said, I see a lot of bald heads and gray hair and so on and so forth. I think in the United States, the upcoming entrepreneurial class are not the young people. We hear about them because they are the props. But the real entrepreneurs are really older people. And they are coming back into the workforce, trained by GE, trained by GM, and laid off. And now they are founding their own companies. They are founding ways of impacting the society. And I think that is a very important component that should participate in the workforce. So anyway, I can go on and on and on. But I also look to the future. And since there were comments about technologies, I like that. You know, what's ahead of us? In fact, you mentioned something I was going to mention, the material genome. And now we know much more about materials, and we can create all kinds of materials, including materials for lithium-ion batteries. When I was on the board, I know Argonne was working actively, and I've been working on it actively. This is not the forum for me to get into that, but maybe in the future I will tell you that there's good news ahead. Cars will go 250, 300 miles. And fast charge is around the corner. But I would say it is the CRISPR technology, I'll just mention it for the biologist, that is very important. CRISPR technology is true gene editing, and it's revolutionary. And I was myself frightened when Professor Zhang at MIT said, with an injection, you can now transform the genome of a creature. Now, that's a very powerful, I'm sure you're following that at Mass General. It's a very powerful field that merits watching. The other one is the merger of silicon and carbon. It's happening at a tremendous rate. I mean, here I carry my iPhone. For all practical purposes, this could be just inside my head. Almost everything now is in this. I find my way, I can translate, I can do all of those things. So that merger of silicon and carbon is happening so quickly that we have to pay much attention to acceleration, augmentation of human mind and innovation and discoveries. And I would say because of global warming, whoever called it global warming should be asked to, I would say, denounce that, because it is really, yes, to be sure, global warming, but we all know the real danger is in the variance. And people, therefore, have not understood the real danger. Mean increases, okay, the temperature will increase by 1 degree, so I will have less fuel consumption. And you say, no, 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 you don't get it. It's the variance that is changing. And it's the variance that's destructive. And it's the variance that is increasingly showing up as weather violence. I always viewed it since 1995. I said, call it weather variance, call it climate violence. But at any rate, it is now, of course, a runaway phenomenon, and I'm sure it will be one day anyway. I would say a huge area of research, industry, government is mega projects and mega structures, because our infrastructure is truly at risk. And I'm very glad that in Turkey there are many companies that seem to be doing mega projects. So let me conclude by saying that it's always a great pleasure for me to come to this forum. And please don't mind my comments that are meant to be provocative, but in an entertaining way. And if you take them too seriously, please go and buy a book by Nasruddin Hoca so that you can inject some humor into these very serious thoughts. But overall, I will express my philosophy. I'm a pessi optimist. I am pessimistic about today. That's democracy. You have to be pessimistic. You have to be dissatisfied. You have to say, no, 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 I'm not done yet. I want more. But be civilized to do it in a forum that will resolve the conflict. And I'm very optimistic about our future. I'm very optimistic about the future of our human society. So many thanks, TASSA.
What a way to finish the day. You know, Kenan is a really good friend of TASSA, and at the board, we said we have to give Kenan a gift, and he said, what could we possibly give, right? I mean, he supports us. He's our mentor. He's our leader. So we decided at the board to establish a Young Scholar Award under his name. So next year we will have the first TASSA Kenan Şahin Young Scholar Award. So
and I'm happy to fund that scholarship. Very happy.